saw a familiar face walking on the avenue. Both surprised by the way we looked. The years had changed us too. We smiled and both embraced like old friends often do.
Hello again. Welcome to another episode of GungHo. It's December 12, 2008, and I'm continuing my conversation with Frank Romeo, a Vietnam vet, severely wounded, back home with no safety nets, and we're up to the point now where you're at West Point, I guess.
I'm at West Point. I got discharged from St. Albans Military Hospital after a year in a hospital. Totally addicted to drugs. Took morphine morning, noon, and night. I took other barbiturates. And I continued to do drugs. The Army wouldn't give me any more drugs. They just gave me a desk job at West Point. They wouldn't discharge me. Apparently they didn't want to give me a medical discharge. And eventually I was busted for drugs. I'm probably the only person in the history of West Point to be busted for drugs. I don't know of any.
You actually busted on the grounds of West Point?
On the grounds. They waited for me to come in. They surrounded me. They put guns in my face. They thought they had Dillinger, and it was just me. You know.
Did they catch you with drugs?
Yeah. I had morphine. I had bought morphine. I had heroin, and I was busted for drugs. Yeah, and there were other people on the base using them, but they wanted to use me as an example because it was West Point. We all know West Point is where all our generals come from, the premier military installation in the world. So they made an example out of me.
You were court-martialed?
I was court-martialed.
Did they put you in a lockup and hold you there until the court-martial?
They kept me locked up. West Point, because they had never come across this before, didn't have a jail. So they kept me with armed guards in a barracks. They found a barracks that was empty. They put me in a barracks with armed guards until I went through the court-martial. Then they didn't have a way of transporting me. They actually drove me down from West Point to Fort Dix, New Jersey, where the stockade was, in the general's car. And literally I pulled up to the stockade in the general's car, and I was put in a prison cell, and I stayed the remainder of my military career locked up in a jail cell.
This was after the court-martial?
After the court-martial.
How long was that?
I had 6 months left on my tour of duty, on my 2 years.
So you get discharged from the jail?
I get discharged from the United States Army from a prison cell. I got out of my cell. They hand me my discharge papers, dishonorably discharged. I then later had to hire a lawyer and go back to West Point and appeal it. And because of my military record and outstanding military record and what I had experienced and gone through in my service and fighting in Tet and Cambodia, they reversed it. And they knew what they had done. They had made an example of me.
You know something? Those are called mitigating circumstances. Your military record.
Mm-hmm.
Your first lawyer at the first court-martial, I bet, didn't bring that up.
Well, the lawyers, now a court-martial has totally, the Army, the military has different laws.
I know.
As you know, you're a lawyer, and you know, you have to have a civilian lawyer, and then you have to have a military lawyer to transport in, the words and everything and change them and translate them to you civilian lawyer. Meanwhile, the court, it's not a judge. You're sitting before a panel of all generals. It's like it's scarier than Nam.
Oh,
Yeah.
All right. So
it was another tour of duty.
So you get out. How old are you now?
Oh God, I'm still a teenager, so I haven't reached. I don't think I was 20 yet. I'm turning 20 now.
And where did you go from there?
I went from West Point to Fort Dix Stockade. Then I reversed it, and then I went home. I went home, and as I left, the funny thing was, the world had changed while we were away. And because I lived in a jungle, I didn't have any outside news. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know about the anti-war movement. And I was still in uniform, and there was an anti-war demonstration going on outside, and when they saw me, they spit on me. And that was the way I was welcomed home. They literally spit in my face and called me a murderer and a baby killer. And well, you know the story from there, how we were treated.
There was a time before they would separate the so-called warriors from the war.
Yeah.
Because we were never called warriors.
Yeah.
And we were the epitome or we were the war.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
wasn't nice coming home.
No, no. I had a difficult time, and I continued to do drugs, and I had a very difficult time. PTSD wasn't known at the time, or at least they didn't label it PTSD. They called it Vietnam War syndrome or depressive neurosis. In any event, I showed examples of what we know as PTSD today: anger, rage. I was so mad and so angry all the time, and I couldn't hold down a job. I showed the classic symptoms of PTSD right from the get-go, right from the beginning.
And no treatment.
No treatment whatsoever. I went to the VA, and it's funny because we all went to the VA, and they would pay us at the time to go there, like 12 or 15 bucks for transportation. So we would pile, you know, half a dozen guys in a van or a car or something. We'd all go there. We'd all get drugs. The VA would give us whatever we want, you know, Quaaludes and Secanols and
But no treatment.
and no treatment. And then they'd give us 15 bucks each. So we'd buy liquor with it, and we'd party for another month and go back next month. And that went on for a decade.
And at the time, we didn't even know about, when we came home, we didn't know about, we never heard the phrase Agent Orange.
Agent
We had
Orange.
no clue.
Nothing. Nothing. Didn't
All
know
right,
anything.
now I know from talking to you that you have PTSD like over 100%. And
With everything I have, I'm rated 140%, of course. You know, if you add all my disabilities up, it's 140.
how long did it take you to get that disability?
It didn't take me long. I mean, they gave it to me. I'm probably one of the longest living veterans diagnosed with PTSD at 100%. I mean, PTSD related. They gave it to me right off the bat. Went to the VA, and I got a disability rating. They upped it to, you know, to like 80%, then they upped it to 100%. So I've been 100% for close to 50 years now.
And I assume you got some treatment at the VA as you went along, because I know that right now there's a lot of.
Oh,
There's a lot of
eventually,
treatment.
yeah, eventually. But it took me a long time. You know, we went through the period of denial. You go through the stages of PTSD. I teach it now. I've been teaching it for 30 years and talking about it. But you go through the stages, and the first one is denial. You know, you got that macho. You know, it's part of our survival training for going through combat. And I went through these stages, and you know, finally, when I was diagnosed with PTSD, and I realized it, I finally, it made sense to me when they explained it to me about that I was traumatized and I was reacting to it. Finally, in midlife, I came to terms with it, and I began to.
It took me, and there's nothing unusual about it. It took me until I think I was 59
Yeah.
when my wife noticed there was something wrong, and I started my first counseling in 2002, and I was diagnosed with PTSD, and I got mad and stopped,
Yeah.
and I went back in 2010.
Yeah.
But I know that, tell me first of all, when did they finally recognize there was such a thing as PTSD?
Well, PTSD, originally in the 60s and early 70s, guys like me went into the VA, they gave us drugs, but the red flag went up, and of course computers weren't invented then, so it was on paper that, you know, this guy's messed up, and that went on for decades. And then not until the 80s did we really realize, Congress said, wait, we have a problem. It was actually an orderly in Chicago that connected the dots with all the veterans coming in and saying the same thing, you know, sleepless nights and nightmares and flashbacks, and saying the same symptoms over and over again. And this orderly in Chicago connected the dots and put it together, finally made a presentation to Congress, and Congress commissioned a study on what was then Vietnam War syndrome, and that took another 10 years of study. And then the American Psychiatric Association stepped in and redefined the boundaries and the diagnosis and treatment of then Vietnam War syndrome and renamed it post-traumatic stress disorder of what we know today, as we know it today. And at that point, it made sense to me. And I had an epiphany, and I began to realize what was going on with me. And I went home, and I'll never forget it. I began crying and reliving all my experiences, the day I got shot, my nightmares of being alone in the jungle, and I began to doodle and create art. And I began to make pictures. And I began to like...
Paintings.
Yeah, well, I started doodling, and then every little doodle came with a story. And then I just picked up, I never had art training in my life. I never took an art class, and I just began painting art. And each one has a story. This is my first painting right here.
And you went on to paint many, many more?
Oh yeah, I went on to paint. And this is my first painting. I call him Why. And kind of my comment of what was going on in my life. Why was I going through this? So that's...
Why the war?
Yeah, why?
Why me?
Yeah, why me is right.
Why is this happening?
Yeah, the age-old question, which, you know, I'm still asking that question, why?
Yeah.
You know?
And these other paintings.
Well, finally realized I wasn't alone. You know, that was the main thing. I always felt like no one could understand how I feel. I'm sure you felt like that. You know, I have a secret no you can possibly understand. Well, with my artwork, I realized there were other people that felt just like I did. Like they had the same feelings and emotions that I did. And they were creating artwork. Now, I never showed my artwork to anyone. It wasn't meant for you to see. It wasn't meant for the light of day. Because it was my personal story. It was my diary. So I was writing down the story, my story in art, the only way I knew how, my only outlet. And so were these other gentlemen that created this artwork. So I began to look at them, I began to search them out, I began to go to different museums, I began to go to different art shows, and I started collecting post-traumatic stress disorder artwork done by soldiers that have been traumatized. They can't talk about their feelings and emotions, so they create art, just like me. And I began collecting.
You know, I saw this art on display at Lincoln Center in the early 80s.
Yeah.
I thought, everyone except the one that you painted. I've seen these before.
Yeah. These are copies, of course. They're not originals. And when I find a piece of artwork that fits in how I feel or my words that goes along, I ask the artist if I can recreate it. And at my own expense, I have it recreated. And I have it, it's called computer imaging, and it's just like the real thing. So I began to collect this artwork, and then it dawned on me. Then the light went off. Then I realized I was documenting American history through art. I was telling the story of us, a generation of men that were shunned by society. We went underground, and we created artwork.
People say a picture is worth 1,000 words.
Yeah.
A painting is worth maybe 3,000 words.
Yeah.
Like,
so I was documenting American history through art, and by collecting this collection. And then I realized, really 2 light bulbs went off. I realized not only was I documenting American history, I was documenting the emotional history of our country. I was documenting PTSD from its infancy, from its inception, from Vietnam, from the battlefield, right through to PTSD as we know it today. I was documenting the emotional history of our country.
and you call this the art of war.
I call it the art of war. And then I said, whoa, this is cool. I have to tell everybody about this. I invented something. Of course, I didn't invent something, but in my mind, my warped mind that had been so messed up for so many years, I says, I have to tell everyone I know about this. Look what I've discovered. Of course, I didn't discover it, but I started traveling around the country with my art collection. It's done by all different men. The subject matter is always the same, PTSD, post-trauma. I started traveling around the country with a van full of artwork. I would sleep in my van, literally, and I would take it out and show it to anyone who would listen to me, and I would talk about PTSD, and that was 30 years ago. I've been teaching PTSD. I've been talking about PTSD. for 30 years now at an educational level. I've been suffering PTSD for 50 years, so that's longer than any clinician or doctor practicing today.
Incredible. All right. So you're collecting this, and you're on a mission. And how are people reacting to what you're doing about PTSD?
Well,
and
I believe in education before the fact, and I believe in educating young people going into the military, and I believe in letting them, you know, react to it and opening up a dialogue. So I use the artwork, and you can see it's just you don't need me to talk. Just look at the artwork; it speaks for itself. You look at somebody's artwork and you say, what was going on in that guy's head that day? So you don't need me to talk, but I open up this dialogue using art, as you see all around us, and we get into conversations, and people open up, and we open up a dialogue. And it's before the fact. You know, we're a country that waits for someone to get hit by the car, and then we put up the stop sign. You know, we throw money after the fact. We don't throw money, preventatively. I believe in education before the fact. I believe in educating young people going into the military about the realities of war, and I use artwork as a vehicle.
Do you think the services have picked up on this at all, educating them?
Oh no, they haven't. They don't. When you are a recruit, and I've been in the schools, and I don't think they're making enough of an effort. I don't think that with all the money they spend after the fact, I know how much I get being 50 years 100% disabled, and multiplied throughout my life, it's a couple of $1 million, and I'm just one veteran. There are 20 million veterans in this country. I estimate at least $3 trillion has been put in our pockets, just cash alone, since World War II. That's not counting VA medical assistance, outreach programs, drug and alcohol, transportation. That's nothing. That's not counting that. Put in our pocket in compensation, I believe the government has spent close to $3 trillion since World War II. None of it's going to pre-education. I'm the only one doing this. I'm the only one pushing for education. I've been doing it for 30 years.
I could see this being done in VA locations.
I've been in VA hospitals. I like the idea of pre-education as opposed to post. I do a lot of talking. I just came back from 6 weeks on the road. I spoke to Syracuse University, their social work department, the College of Social Work, and Military Studies, and I spoke there. So people are now paying attention to me, but it's 30 years. And it's 30 years, every day we produce more veterans with more issues. We need to stop the bleeding. We need to have this conversation at the educational level.
Something, you're an example of what happened to us. I mean, nobody really paid attention to us until recently.
No?
They finally said, oh, wait a minute, the veterans, the Vietnam veterans, they didn't start the war. They didn't cause the war.
No.
They just went there because they were told to go there.
No.
Why do we hate them so much?
Yeah.
And you made them hate themselves too because of the way you treated them.
Exactly. There was no self-esteem to us. I was embarrassed to be a veteran. I was embarrassed to wear my uniform. I was spit on. I talk to young people. I just came from doing a week at Bay Shore lecturing, and I was in South Huntington, and I finished up yesterday. And I tell students, I said, I was spit on. I refused to wear my uniform because when I did, people would ridicule me. And they can't wrap their mind around that today. Because today it's a veteran-friendly world, and things have changed, and for the better.
We were so naive. When I came home, I still owed the Marine Corps some time. And on occasion, I had to go to D.C., sometimes on business, sometimes. But they told me straight out, if you're going to go to D.C., you can't go in uniform. And
right.
And they told me we don't want the civilians to see how many people are in the military. That wasn't the reason.
No.
They knew that,
No.
Wow. So when I saw Ali North in his uniform, testifying, I said, how do you get away with that? You know, you
Yeah,
think,
right. I
so
mean, really.
naive.
And now someone's listening to me. I'm on a TV show now. And you know, I speak. I never went to college, and I speak at Syracuse University. Or, you know, we were both speakers, guest
Oh,
speakers
my God.
in Kingston, New York, just a month
Well,
ago?
let's
Month
end
and a
with
half
that.
ago?
Then we're going to talk about what you're going to do.
Yeah,
Again, we met on November 3rd in Kingston at an event called God and Country.
right.
And there's no doubt that me and Frank, and there was a nurse there that served in Vietnam, were not about God and Country.
No. If anything, we were outcast, and then we would have hit it a show. I mean, we told it like it was.
Yeah.
I mean, there is no, you know, it's not glorified. We're not glorifying. I'm not glorifying the act of war. I'm not pro or anti-war. And I'm not political in any way. And I make that clear during my lectures. But I'm about reality, and I'm about what we ask our children to do. And to be in that conference, you and I, and to stick out. It's a good thing we were sitting next to each other at the dinner table,
Yes,
because
yes.
no one would have talked to us.
No, in the end, they loved us.
I know that.
They loved us.
Right? And to tell you, to go back to the person who was running the show, I put up, I'll tell the audience, your followers, that I put up this artwork, and he made me take it down. He made me take it down because he called it demonistic. He called it was demonizing artwork. He still didn't understand post-trauma. He's running a conference, a living history conference with veterans. And we had active military duty Marines there, right? And he still, they didn't grasp the concept that this is done by our veterans. This is how they think. This is how they were treated, or this is how they reacted to combat. It's less than glorified. And we, you know, and again, I'm not anti-war. I know we need an army, but, you know, let's be honest.
But he changed his mind. What happened?
The Marines changed his mind.
Is that what happened?
I went to bed late that night. I had a few cocktails at the bar, and I took down the exhibit like he asked. He still wanted me to speak, and I told him, sorry, I'm out of here. I'm packing up my art, and I took it up. I put it up. I took it down. And I went to the bar, had a few drinks. I went to bed. 3 o'clock in the morning, the phone rings. It's the Marines.
A Marine.
The guy who was the head of the Marine unit. There were about half a dozen active Marines that were part of the conference. And the Marines called me and said, please, we love it. We want you back. Please come back. We will help you set up the artwork. And they did. The
You
Marines.
should have, you know something? You should have told the audience. Did you tell them that? I don't remember.
No, I didn't have the whole.
Why? Why not?
Well, you know, they were very receptive to us and the artwork. And they appreciated where it came from. You know, these are veterans. I didn't do this artwork. I did one, but these are veterans, and this is how they reacted. If you look around this room and you see this artwork, I didn't make this up. So I didn't make up PTSD. I didn't invent it. I talk about it. I teach it, but this is real veterans talking about real issues, and God and Country was not part of it.
It was I thought it was an incredible event the way it turned out.
It turned out great.
We had veterans going back to World War II. They were at Bataan and Corregidor. Then we had people
Iwo Jima. I mean, there were. It was
Chosun
awesome.
Reservoir.
It was awesome. And then they wound up the show with you and then me.
The whole afternoon started out with the nurse, Lieutenant Meeks. And she was not about God and Country, and boy, she really let them know what happens to these young people.
She was a triage nurse. She was in the field at a MASH unit hospital in Vietnam. She seen it all. And those were her boys. She called them her boys.
Yes.
My boys, she still talks to her boys. And she had seen it. You know, you and I seen combat. We're done. We're out of there. She saw it every day. The arms, the legs, the missing parts, the dead people, the blown up people, the burnt people. She saw it all. I mean, and she suffers PTSD. And she wasn't, you know, she was a nurse. You don't think about it. Think about those doctors and nurses. I mean, what
it
they
turned
went
out
through.
that Lieutenant Meeks and another, I think, Lieutenant or Captain Fury, who I know for a while now, was a nurse, and they served together.
Yeah.
And she was greatly affected. She has really serious PTSD.
Yeah.
How could you not? I mean, someone
Yeah.
in combat, or someone, helping veterans almost on the front line, it's going to change your life forever.
Yeah. I mean, and this is the basis of my teachings. This is what I've been advocating for 30 years. I'm talking about, if we're going to ask our children to do horrific things and to experience these horrific things, I think they need all the tools. I think they should be told the truth. I think they should be educated. Of course, you can't know how a person's going to react in combat. But the reality is they're going to combat. I think you should be honest with them, and I think you should maybe talk about some of these subjects, and that's what I do. I talk about them. I share my experiences, like you're doing on your show. I share that at the educational level.
This is, I think, my father used to tell me over and over again, the word is more powerful than the sword, and I believe in the word. I believe in doing this and doing other things like what you're about to do, events or whatever, lectures or whatever, speeches and shows and writing. I write. I've written a lot about nonfiction about my time in the Marine Corps.
Yeah.
And people really, they love it. And it's nothing political, just this is the way it was.
Yeah.
This is what, was going on.
Right.
All right, we're just about to end another show. I can't believe this. All right. All right, we're going to pick up again with post-traumatic stress disorder. And I'll add a little bit of what happened with me about post-traumatic stress, and we're over.
Line, 'cause friends are friends for time. Where have my old friends gone? Where are they now? Used to be a walk away in my hometown, but they're so far away, as far as far can be. But in my heart they're close to. Yes, in my heart they're close to. In my heart they're close to